Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 35th Annual California Small Farm Conference. We're stoked to have you here for today's workshop. We're going to be diving into a really important topic, which is succession. We're going to be talking, this is easing the transition, succession planning for farmers. So if that's the workshop you're looking for, you're in the right place. And we've got our terrific panel who's going to go over this process and what it entails. So with that, before we dive in, just want to encourage people to use the chat to engage, ask questions. We'll try to get your questions answered throughout the workshop. And otherwise, enjoy the workshop, and why don't you take it away?
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to share my screen here while I chat. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see it, I hope? Thank you so much for being here. As Evan said, this is the succession planning workshop. My name is Jenna Muller, and I'm the Northern California Program Director with the California Agricultural Mediation Program. You're going to meet our other panelists in a few minutes. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what CALAMP is in a few minutes, but I wanted to just say, first of all, that planning for the successful transition of an agricultural business is and can be really tricky on a lot of fronts. It can be tricky on a financial level and also on an emotional level. So today we're going to try and kind of get into both of those aspects and talk about how to navigate them and how to create a structure to move through both of them. So let's see here. So we're going to start with, this is just a little sort of roadmap for the day. We're going to talk about who we are and what CALAMP is so that you can have that as a resource. And we're going to meet two of our farmers here today. We have Annie and Allison from Good Humus Farm, and who they are successfully navigating a transition. So I'm sure you'll be interested to hear about their experience. We're going to figure out who you are and talk a little bit about, why this is important, particularly at this moment in time. And then we're going to kind of lay out a roadmap for you. We have 4 sort of steps that we've created to help you get started and help you move through a process. And then we're going to talk about communication, because we have found that that can often be a barrier. Even if you can have the financial steps in place, the communication can make it more challenging. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to leave a lot of time at the end for questions, about 30 minutes or so for questions. And please, if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll either incorporate them as we go if something, comes up that's really important, or we'll hold them till the end and kind of go through all of them at that point. So please do just put them in the chat, and we will be monitoring that as we go along. All right, so Annie and Allison, can you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Annie Main, founder with my husband Jeff Main of Good Humus Produce in 1976, probably before anybody was born. They are here, and we started organic farming at that time in Woodland and in the and now we're located in the Cape Valley, Hungry Hollow area. And we now have 30 acres. We started on 3/4 of an acre and built up. And we sell to the Davis Farmers Market, which we helped start. We sell to the Davis Food Co-op, which we helped start in '76 in that time. And we sell to the co-ops in SAC and to have a CSA. So we do a little bit of retail, but mostly direct marketing, which was our Jeff and we felt like we wanted to stay small and stay as direct and local as possible. We grow fruits, vegetables, flowers, cut flowers, herbs, jams, jellies, anything we can think of. Allie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'm just the next generation trying to follow in her footsteps. And so I've been back for 6 years after taking some time away, and we're kind of in the throes of figuring it all out.
Great, thank you.
And my name is Mary Campbell. Jenna introduced herself, and Jenna, you can let me know if you want to go through your points on this. But Jenna and I work with the California Ag Mediation Program. and I'm a retired estate planner and divorce mediator, which interestingly enough is a really great match for working with succession planning. I'm also a certified farm transition coordinator with the International Farm Transition Network. And I think just a factoid that people tend to remember when I share is, in addition to being a farm apprentice many years ago, I also drove tomato trucks out of Los Banos back when you had to double clutch.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about myself. So my name is Jenna Muller, and I am also a Farm Transition Network Coordinator. I worked as an attorney in San Francisco before I met my husband. His name's Muller, and he grew up on Full Belly Farm. His parents were the founders of Full Belly Farm, and they had two other partners when they founded it. And I have since become one of the co-owners of Full Belly Farm. So I'm also a second generation farm owner. So in addition to being a mediator and working with a lot of families on some of these issues, I also have had some personal experience with transition and how it can look.
So we wanted to just introduce you to the Ag Mediation Program itself. In 1987, some of you are probably not old enough to remember back when there was a loan crisis and Congress trying to act to help all these farmers, predominantly in the Midwest, but all over the United States, passed a law that created a mediation program that any state could adopt or certify. So we're the program for California. We're certified through the Department of Agriculture in California. When this was originally passed 30 years ago, the legislation allowed organizations like ours to cover any adverse decision from a USDA agency, any loans, any credit problems, wetlands determinations, don't see a lot of those, and grazing permits on national forest lands. We do see that. But we then had an expansion, which is why it's relevant. Oh yeah, we also did crop insurance. I forgot I had these. That's okay. And Jen, am I doing this one?
I'll do this one.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 2018, after about a decade of lobbying, Congress really greatly expanded the issues that the mediation programs could work on. And this was really important because we realized at some point that farms face a lot more challenges than just what was covered under the original bill. So now we can tackle farmer neighbor disputes, like odor, noise, runoff, farm succession planning, family farm transitions, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about today, lease issues, organic certification, credit counseling. So we got a lot more put on our plates, and we have found in the last couple of years that farm succession planning is really where a lot of the challenges lie. So we've been spending a lot of time the last couple of years focusing on this issue. And also any issue that a state Department of Agriculture deems important in that state. So the Secretary of Ag in California can certify us to work on additional issues, and it's all covered under the grant that we receive every year. Okay. So there are many states that have mediation programs, and this is a little graphic. So all of the green states have a mediation program, and now Alaska should also be colored green because they have a certified program now as of last year. And the programs have to be either part of a nonprofit or a land grant university. So California's used to be run through UC Davis, and now we're a nonprofit, or through the State Department of Agriculture. And it's free because we do get a grant to do this work. So that's also something I wanted to mention. Okay, Mary, this is you.
All right, so why are you even in this panel? And we've got a lot of folks in the panel. We just want to bring a couple stats that remind you about the relevancy of this conversation. That in 2018, the Farmers National Company said 70% of farmland in the United States was going to transfer ownership. That's a startling number. So we're really in a unique opportunity with all of this, some of which has already happened, but we want to make sure we're being mindful of this because in this transition, it can either go to an air and stay in ag, or it can go to development or something else. And we want to see ag land stay in ag, hopefully. Also, one of the reasons it doesn't stay in ag is that farm owners don't have a plan. And so for the 97% of these family-owned farms in the United States, only 30% statistically make it to the second generation and 12 by the third. So that's really a scary statistic. We want to change that. And I think there's a lot of programs all over the country that want to change that. That 69% of these families surveyed expect that it's going to continue, but only 23% of those had a plan. So we want to help you have a plan, because the reason farms don't make it is they didn't make a plan, or they're thinking, we will get to that, but they don't get to it. So we're here to say time to get to it so that we can keep ag land. Okay.
All right, so now let's pull up our poll, Evan, if you would please. So we're gonna talk a little, we're gonna figure out sort of where you are. So we want to know who our audience is.
And I don't know how, there we go.
Okay.
And Jenna, we also want to remember while they're doing that, we're going to come back to what mediation is.
Okay, great.
So just take a minute to think about this.
And then I think we're going to get to see the results here.
Yeah, Evan can keep us apprised.
Yep, we've got about 50% of people have responded so far.
Okay.
So we'll give them just a little bit longer. Think about those questions.
And just as so where are you in the lineup? Would you be a generation that might be transitioning out or coming in? And we did expect there might be some service providers here. Don't let the question who has an estate plan throw you. Let's call that like, do you have a will or a trust? If you have something, some people may just have a power of attorney, which does not last past death, just as a reminder. I think a lot of people think a power of attorney will cover things, but it actually doesn't. But that's part of an estate plan. And then who have you talked? It doesn't mean you have to have it all buttoned up, but have you begun that conversation? So maybe you've got an estate plan, but you didn't tell anyone about it, which we have found has happened in some of the families we've worked with. So you don't have to have completed the conversation. We just want to know, have you started that conversation? A service provider, thank you, Amy D, would be like someone who's helping farm families go through a succession plan. It could be an accountant. It could be people that are supporting those families that have a farm. Hopefully that clarifies it. Good. I see the head nod. Okay, great. You're one of the few people in my line that I could see.
All right, let's go ahead and close up this poll and see what we got.
Okay, cool. 30% retiring generation, 70% incoming. Looks like a few estate plans out there.
But mainly not.
But mainly not. Okay.
Very normal. That's a very normal
yeah.
statistic.
Yeah.
That's why you're here.
That's why you're here. Have you had conversations with your children, parents about a transition plan for the business or land? Yes, 21%. No, about 40%. And yes, but no firm plan. So great. Okay.
That's a lot of people who haven't talked about it. Just take a look at that. That's a lot of people. So good. Okay. Well, let's get to it then. So do you want to go to the, so
yeah,
go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, well, no, go ahead.
Well, what we wanted to do, we also wanted to just define this word mediation, because CALAMP is called the Ag Mediation Program, and people get thrown. We just want to say, use the word coaching if mediation seems like a weird word. But the whole point of having this program is it's, you can choose to use it or not. It's voluntary. Whatever you say, because we use the word mediation, it's considered protected under the California Evidence Code. So these family conversations are private. They can't get used in another setting. And that's really important, I think, for a lot of people. The folks that help you have these conversations, like Jenna or myself, are trained neutrals. So we are trained not to be take any one position. We want everyone to succeed. So we don't have an agenda, because this is something you have to live with. And then you make the decisions. I think that's super important, if that you are the decision makers, which results in a collaborative plan. And I have a thing of water on my wood stove, so I'm hearing it whistle a little bit. So if you hear a background noise, let me know, and I'll mute myself from that. But so that's when you hear the word mediation, we have no vested interest. So we have to live your lives. We want this to be the plan that helps you live the lives that you want and have the future that you want for your farm, and that you've made the plan that you feel is right for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have broken down succession planning into 4 steps. And the first part of it is to do an inventory of what you have and where you are in this moment. And so that means that's it. We're going to go into each of these steps in detail, but that is not only an inventory of your land and your tractors and the assets that you have, but also skill sets, right? That is another asset. And so it's analyzing all of those things, both in the retiring generation and in the incoming generation. And then, and we'll go into more detail about that. But then what you want to do is you want to determine, okay, where is it that each generation wants to be in 3 to 5 years and in 10 years? So you want to make a shorter term plan and a longer term plan for both the younger generation and the older generation. And that's going to look really different depending on the business that you have and the family that you're in. And then really critical is finding the right professionals to support you. So if that's an estate planner or a tax advisor or a mediator coach, it's putting that team in place to help move you through and to get you the answers that you need, because lots of questions are going to come up along the way. And then finally, creating a plan that everybody can live with and stick to.
And oh, you're going to bring up the regenerator?
Yeah, or Annie and Allie, do you guys want to talk a little bit about what, sort of the FarmLink regenerator program that you did? Just introduce it.
Sure. I have to say that we got an email at one point from FarmLink, and I saw it, and it said, would your farm be interested in participating in a year-long class on farm succession? And I saw that without talking to the rest of the family, I responded and said yes. And so we did do a year-long class with FarmLink. It was a once-a-month, all-day class on all of what we're talking about today. And it took all year to figure it out. And so it was a huge commitment, more than we felt capable of doing. But when I told the family that that's what I had done, my husband Jeff said, well, we can do this ourselves. We can figure this out. And I said, yeah, we can. Not in this lifetime, though. And so we persevered the class, and it was absolutely invaluable. We couldn't have gotten where we went without it.
Great. All right. Thank you.
And I think it'd be helpful to know the class was a once-a-month meeting. And really, I think the bigger picture is that it paired communication training with then professional, like overview of like taxes or an overview of an estate plan. So each month had a different focal point. And so we we recognize a lot of people won't be in that program, but what we're outlining can give you the similar path. You'll just have to do some of your own work around gathering that team and making that time commitment.
Right. Okay. Mary, you want to take this one? Oh, Mary, I think you're muted.
The first step in any type of estate plan is figuring out where you are. It's really hard to look ahead if you haven't addressed what you have and how it's held. We found working with the families that we talked to, there was all different ways that people held their assets. Sometimes the land itself was held individually, but the business was held in a corporation or LLC or partnership. Sometimes there was inherited land, so only one spouse held it and it hadn't ever been put into both parties' names, which is fine, but that we want you to understand where you are with those decisions. Do you have any type of retirement investments? And what do you owe? What is the long-term and short-term debt pictures? And how can you transfer? What if some of those debts would be assignable or assumable by the next generation? And again, these are big questions, and you'll actually would do quite a bit of homework to do this part. I think Annie will attest to that. And then what do you do? If you had to write a job description for yourself, what would it look like? I think we worked with a farming family recently, and the exercise we did was we had everybody but that person describe the job that person does. And it was shocking how on the money the list was, but also what was shocking was how big the list was for each person. And what was eye-opening is for that family was how each person may be doing too much, and how can we be more efficient with everyone and what they do. So if you had to write a job description for yourself, I think it would be, you might have an interesting result. And we marked a couple points here to see what Annie and Allie would add. I think you had a unique situation, Annie. In particular, you had made a plan before you ever came to the regenerator about holding the land and protecting it through an easement. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, Jeff and I were, co-partnered, co-owned Good Humus Produce. And as we were going into year 25, year 30, we were wondering how the farm was going to continue. And if we, I felt like we were always talking about sustainability and how to sustain the land. And we decided, how are we going to sustain this farm? And so we put our farm into an affirmative action easement. It took 10 years to do. So if you're thinking of an easement, start it yesterday. And but that was just one level of so to speak farm succession. It was not the question of how does then the farm transfer to the next generation. And so we worked as a married couple, as a partnership. But Allie, could you talk about as we were going into transition, the decisions of, what do we do? Are we incorporate LLC, individual, because it's really interesting, because every single farm has different situations and different decisions to make. And so Allie could talk about where we are progressing at this moment.
Yeah, we had to switch, as many farms will at this point, from a nice married couple into a group. And so there's 5 of us, my 2 siblings, myself and my parents. And we had to figure out how to transition from my parents' system of basically just living off the land, and that's all incorporated into their income and expenses, into something that was a bit more tidy. I think it really began as we started this project. My dad put a lot of energy into figuring out which organizational system would work best for us, and he landed on the partnership to start with. Really because it was he felt like it was the most flexible. It was really easy to go in and out and change it and modify it as we started to figure out what worked for us and what didn't. The LLC is pushed hard on small businesses because of the liability aspect to it, which can be really valuable. And so we had to sort of weigh the pros and cons and how much at risk we felt like we were before making that decision. But really, I mean, we're small and kind of felt like we could continue doing what we were doing and evolve as we went. And so it really is just a starting point right now, and we're looking into it and continuously kind of having the conversation as to what makes the most sense. But it just was such a navigation to try to figure that out, and the partnership became like a starting point, a jumping off point. I think it really was useful to be in that regenerator and have people coming to us who we could talk to about it and open our eyes to maybe something that we had missed. But it just has come down to us for like what works for the business that we've created and what pieces we have to fit together.
So I just want to clarify that we are a legal partnership filed with the state. So it's more than just just Jeff and I putting together a partnership. So
Yes.
we are a legal partnership, and probably in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll probably transition into an LLC or some other form of,
And
partnership.
before we leave the land trust issue or the easement issue, I think Annie spoke very briefly, but there was a vision, and correct me if I'm mistaken, Annie, that you wanted to make the land protected to stay in ag, but also affordable for the next farmer, whether it was your children or not, because you didn't know if your kids would be coming back.
Right.
And so that sent you on a very long adventure in both fundraising to raise the money so a land trust could buy it, and then the land trust buying those development rights and protecting it in perpetuity. And then you found out later your kids were indeed going to be coming back. But that was a big, big step that might differentiate you from some other farmers.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to point out, my mom said it took 10 years, and it did, but a big part of that was because it was such a unique land trust. I think there's a lot more simple versions you can do, but my parents were really adamant that the land needed to stay affordable. It had to be farmed. The farmer has to live on the land. They have to make 50% of their income from farming. And so it's really not a simple piece of paper. It's really in depth and goes into a lot of extended details onto how specifically it is to be used. Right, Mom? I'm sure you can say way more.
And the reason that we did that was because we're close to Full Belly Farm, who has an internship program. We've had some interns, and basically not very many interns can turn around and start farming in our area because it's so expensive. And they're, most of them are in Minnesota, Alaska, wherever, not here, Oregon. And so what we saw was that farming, passing the farm on to the next generation. We had debt, so we couldn't just give it to the next generation. And so it's not affordable. And so the idea was that with all those requirements that Ali was talking about, it reduces the value of the developmental value of the land, leaving only the agricultural value of the land, which we still own and can sell. And so the idea is that the next farmer can afford to purchase a farm with a farming income. And so instead of the land being $500,000 or $600,000, it's now $200,000, which we felt a young farmer could pay off in their lifetime. So that was the bottom line purpose of putting our farm into an easement. And indeed, we did not have any expectation or thought that our kids would come back from art school, communication, CAL FIRE, jobs to the farm. We had no expectation of that. They were on their way. And so we were trying to figure out how to continue this. Our farm, we've been working it for 35, 40 years, and it's the first generation of that farm development. And to be a mature farm, it needs multiple generations to reach a mature farm situation. So the only way to do that in our eyes was to put it into an affordable package in an easement. And it was not, as Ali said, it wasn't easy, but we feel like it is what's necessary in farmland that is way out of for the new generation to afford.
And I had 2 questions for you guys relating to your business structure. I would love if you could share sort of how long it took to make the decision about what entity to choose and whether you have a written partnership agreement.
Oh, Jenna. Ali?
Yeah, sure. The decision to create the partnership, I don't think took that long. It was more like the ship just needed to move. And so as I was mentioning, my dad put the energy into looking into it. He's sort of been that branch of the farm for a long time. And so he took the lead and went that direction, and we all were in the know, and we all had a moment to comment on it, but it moved pretty quickly. And we knowing specifically that it was going to be a jumping off point and it didn't have to be forever. We knew that we did not know what we were getting into. And so something that could move with us made a lot of sense. But it wasn't a lengthy process.
Okay.
On the other hand, we have not yet finalized our partnership agreement. So
Okay. Do you have a draft going?
Mom?
Yes, we do have a draft. We do have a partnership agreement, but it needs to be finalized. But I also want to add to that in this regenerator class, all the way through that year-long process, we were advised to become incorporated. Hard, very, very direct, and we have resisted because we're not quite got our ducks lined up in a row and are a small enough farm, not really out there in the big world, so to speak. We don't do wholesale, and so we didn't feel like our liability is quite so vulnerable. But so it was interesting how hard we were pushed to incorporate, but we're not ready to do that, but I think that it will happen.
Okay. So you really had to figure out, okay, for our farm, for us, what really fits the best.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So on to, there, Mary, I missed one. Sorry. I don't know if you want to comment on that before I move on. You are muted again.
This is a really important last bullet point, but it's great because it's so different from the other ones. And this whole idea of how are you physically doing and emotionally, like, how much are you feeling like you can keep working? And I think this is such an important assessment, and it's not a dollars and cents. It's really an internal assessment. And we do ask our families, where are you on this spectrum? And it can change, but you still have to do an initial assessment of that. Thanks, Jenna.
Can I go back? Can we go back?
Yes.
I'm sorry. You have this question, do you have retirement or investments? I wanted to talk about that because Jeff and I have no retirement plan, no funds for anything. We didn't even have a college fund for the kids. Everything went into the farm. And I feel like it's the retirement comes from selling the farm. That is what most farmers, how they're going to get their pocket of gold, to finish up their years. And so that was a question of how do we do that? How do we retire? I mean, and maybe that's not what this line is. I don't know, but I feel like we have to ask those questions, and it came up in the class. How are you going to pay for your end of life care? How are you going to pay for whatever? And those are big, difficult things to talk about. And I think most of us probably don't have investments. The investment has been 150% into the farm. Everything goes back into the farm. So I just want to let everybody know that, that it's okay, I think, not to. You just have to figure out how to manage it.
And to also acknowledge the conversations are going to be really challenging. Talking about money, no matter what, is hard, and figuring out, how much anyone deserves or earned or whatnot, and why having Jenna and Mary around was so valuable.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to share that. I mean, I think this is kind of the crux of it, is that you have to have that conversation, and it's really, really hard to talk about. So thanks for sharing that, because I think I'm sure you're not alone in that boat. Yeah.
No.
All right. So moving on to step 2, which is, where do you want to be? And so everybody's personal timeline is going to be really different. And so it's really important to do sort of an evaluation of how much do you want to work? And this is really going to vary by family. So I know, I have a business partner who really wanted to retire at a certain age and, move on to a different phase of life. And my in-laws are in a different boat. They kind of feel like, we love our jobs and we love being here and we want to shift things, but we don't ever really want to sort of retire in the official sense of the word. And so that's also something that's really important for both generations to get a handle on, is what is it that people want? And for the younger generation too, where are you in your life? Are you just starting to have kids and you want to, really kind of enjoy those early years before you really jump in full time? Or are you ready to be a 60-hour-a-week person right away? So thinking about that for each individual person and sharing that in the group. And then looking ahead at the management, right? So there's working in the business, and then there's transferring the management of it. And that can be another area that really needs some attention to figure out, okay, right now we have a certain group of people managing. How do we move that next group of people into those management positions so they're learning how to run it, so that in 10 years or 15 years or however many years down the line, they are prepared and they have those skill sets to be the managers of the business. And then also talking about, okay, if somebody gets sick, if there's an emergency, what do we do? What kind of plan can we put in place to account for those situations that might arise? Hopefully they won't, but they might arise. And then a second piece of that is looking at the finances. So what does each generation need as income? And this is also going to really vary by family. So we have one person who I've worked with who wanted a certain amount for retirement and then wanted to be done. However, we've worked with other families where the older generation is thinking more along the lines of, I just need a small monthly income and I want to just eventually I want to just be sort of a consultant to the business and have this small amount of income rather than get a lump sum in the beginning. And that's it's really important for the younger generation to think about is too, what do you need as income to be able to make it as a farmer and to stay in this business? And then, where do you want to live? Do you want to stay? Do you want to go? And what are your plans? What are your plans there? So yeah, Annie and Allison, do you want to comment on any of these factors and how that kind of played out for you all?
Sure.
Yeah. Mom, you want to go first?
Yeah. I think that in the class, these questions were asked, and I'm not sure I ever asked myself these questions before the class. And they're hard questions to answer. For me, in our situation, I have put so much of my life into this farm. I cannot imagine ever not being a part of this farm. And so I think that physically my abilities is less and less, but I guess in my mind, retirement in the sense of you retire and walk away does not exist in my thinking, in who I am and what I'll do. So I feel like I'm going to decrease my abilities are going to decrease, but I will still probably be there at the farm. But I'm not really interested in having to do, you know, having to get up and be with the crew at 6 o'clock and, you know, all the stress that's involved. I can see myself being a worker instead of the responsible management team. And so, but anyway, all of this stuff these are hard questions that, you know, so what do I want to do with my time? Or where do I want to be are deep, deep questions that we each have to answer. And in our easement, we say that the next generation farmer has to farm with us for 3 years before a full transition. Well, the reality is 3 years isn't really enough. And I think Allie said she's on year 7, and she's, I think, really is just about ready to launch if she choose to, but she will say she's not ready, but I think she is. So anyway, it's been really interesting, but I think right now, after these years, the management responsibilities has from my roles of in charge of flowers, in charge of the shop, in charge of database and office, that management has changed to Claire, Allie's sister, and Allie is taking on the field aspect of the farm. And so I feel like, you know, we are almost 75% from in my roles, the management has already changed over.
Yeah. And I think everything that was just said is the point, is that you just have to start asking yourself the question as to ideally what does it look like. And the truth is, as anyone knows in farming, is that you can make a plan and it probably won't go that way, or maybe you'll change your mind or whatnot. You know, the pandemic hits and everything switches around anyway. But you've got to start thinking about the hard questions as to what can you do. My parents, I can watch them every day get more and more tired, you know, and you can see the need to do less, not a want. It's like a fundamental need to stop putting out so much. And so having the conversations and talking about how we can reduce, whether it's in the 1, 3, 5, 10-year plan or not, it just for us has really evolved. And it's a conversation and a plan as much as we can. And kind of moving together versus independently.
Okay. I just want to know, if you see asterisks, that's just a cue for us, because they were some points we wanted to make sure we connected with Annie and Allie, but that doesn't mean it's more important than another thing on the list. So I realize that might look a little confusing to people. Those are actually cues for us.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have to have the initial conversation, but then you also have to be willing to continually check in as people age, as people grow into their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to add something here. It's really interesting, because this is such a process. And even though the regenerator class is over, we're not finished. You know, we have our estate plan, but we're obviously not finished. And I don't know, this last week or month, Allie had said to me that I can't quite remember, but she's really trying to lighten my load and lighten, her expectations of what I do. And then the flip side of it is, then I'm feeling, what is the word I was using? I'm feeling not abandoned, but like not important. And so those are the real things in this transition of, she's trying to give me time, and then I don't feel validated in who I am. And those are real transition feelings that come up. And it's just fascinating to see, anyway.
No, I have heard that from a lot of people that, farming is really, it's not just a job, it's your identity, right? And so changing your role and giving things up can be a real, there's things that you hold, like, even if you don't want to physically do them, it's like you hold them, because it's part of who you are. And so making that change can be really tricky just on an emotional level, because it is so much of who you are and what you've put your life into, and now what, so.
Yeah.
And then what about finances? Can you guys comment on sort of how you worked out how to pay the second generation and still have an income for the older generation?
We, Claire and I came in and were just employees until a couple of years ago, or a year and a half or whatnot. And so we just switched that to a draw instead of a wage. So when we became a partnership, we didn't change anything really, we'll increase it a little bit with inflation or whatnot, but we just continued matching what we were getting paid, same as everybody else. And then for my parents, we generate basically, we knew that, there had to be a wage for them, even though they had never once taken a paycheck. And so my dad put together, because he's run the finances for the farm forever, just a monthly sum that would sort of be their essentially retirement. And we then flipped through what the best form of that would be. Would it be a consultation fee? Well, then that's income, which it's all tax stuff, and it's so complicated. And we had Poppy Davis, who would just kind of hold our hand a little bit between it. And we ended up, since they own the land, we've worded it as it's a lease amount. And so we're leasing, the business is leasing the land from my parents, and that supplements their income a bit. But the amounts were all mostly just figuring out what we kind of needed to get by. And it's definitely not extravagant.
Okay, so all of Jeff and Annie's income is framed in terms of we're leasing the land, and that is your, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of that, putting together that team. So you have people in place who you can ask those questions once they become, once they rise to the surface.
Yeah, totally.
We have been, multiple options has come out with the state planner, and one idea is to sell the farm to Allie and Claire. But then when you do that, you have help me out,
capital gains.
Thank you. Capital gains tax, which is significant. And then they would have to take a loan, which then they would have to, have to pay all that. And so it gets complicated in that, we don't have a retirement lump sum for end of life care, whatever. And so that lump sum from selling a property would carry that. But then it didn't seem like that was a great use of our money, and that we'd be giving half of it away or whatever percentage of it away. And so we're just at the moment, Jeff and I have this rent. We have another piece of property that we're getting some rent on, and then we have our Social Security that we paid in all of our farming career. And so that is what we're using for our sort of retirement amount. And so far it's fine. And how we sell the farm or change ownership before we die, before inheritance, is we're still working on that. But I think a big sale is not the best way to go. But those are the questions you have to come up with, or answer, not come up. Well, you do have to come up with them, but you also have to answer them of how you want to get that income.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, there's so much that is at play too. So just to reiterate that finding a good estate planner who understands agriculture and finding a tax consultant who knows agriculture, who can advise on things like Prop 19 and reassessment, and because you don't want any of those things to happen unexpectedly. Yeah. So.
And I think what's
perfect segue to the next slide.
Yes. Okay. I think that's it.
So there's the benefit of this regenerator program was professionals came to the farmers. And again, we recognize a lot of people are not going to be in that situation. So that in no way means that you need to stop. It means time to assemble the team that fits you. Because I'm sure some of the folks that came and talked at the regenerator were not relevant for some of the farmers. So you have to find the match. Almost always you're going to need tax support. And again, as Jenna said, you want someone who's familiar with agricultural issues because they are very unique and there's a lot more opportunities there than someone who doesn't understand that might know. You will need to talk to an estate planner. Estate planners are typically only going to talk to the retiring generation. So that's where folks like Jen and I come in to help the whole family talk and work on things in that conversation, because that really doesn't happen in the estate planner's office. But we can help you be prepared to walk into the estate planner's office with a better understanding of what you want, which gives them the marching orders that are going to fit. We had we had a business consultant out of Chico that worked with the families. And so having those kinds of people can be very helpful. Of course, Jenna and I were the facilitators. And then you may want a creative lending solution. California Farm Link has a lot of unique programs, but they are a small lender. So you may not necessarily find what you want. FSA has young farmers, starting farmers loans. So you may want to find the right partner for financing. And then one of the big questions is who is going to be involved in these conversations? Sometimes it's not the children, but it's a non-family successor. And sometimes a spouse is integral and sometimes it's not integral. And these are all conversations we've had with families. I think we asterisked the land trust here because they played such an important role for the main family that may not be relevant to another family. And I'm going to invite Annie and Allison to talk a little bit about, anything on here, but I think how did facilitation around communication help your family, for at least specifically?
Well, I want to say that before going into this class, not only did we have no accounts or retirement plans, we had no lawyers to go to or, no team to speak of, and a little clueless as to where to even look. We did have an accountant that Jeff worked with for a few years recently, just because of the land trust and the income and all that transpired from that. And so we had somebody that we were talking to, but up until that point, Jeff was doing all the taxes. So we were doing it all ourselves. And so it became clear in the class that there is so much to figure out. It is a world foreign to most of what we do, and but it became really important to. We went up to Chico and we did talk to an estate planner to ask these questions of inheritance and how do we pass our property on. We actually have 3 properties to pass on, and the scenarios of property tax. I inherited my family's home in Santa Rosa, and if I wasn't aware of the parent to child property tax portion, I would have purchased this property and then not been able to afford to keep it, because in the transition, the property tax was so high that I couldn't afford it. So all these things, all these opportunities, decisions, information, it's hard to sift through, but you gotta sift through them. You gotta ask, find out the questions and look for the answers to what fits your situation. Again, we had already done the land trust work, which who knew that was a big deal, but I mean, in this process, but it causes some restraints that we are all having to work around, but it was good to have spent that time to think it through. And then as we did this class, half the class each day that we attended was, I think, on communication. And, I wanted to go through this class and get my documents, get my will, and get all the medical and all those things that we didn't have in order. And I was sitting there the first class thinking, why are we spending so much time on communication? We communicate just fine. And but then you realize that you're having to talk about inheritance, you're having to talk about money, you're talking about who's inheriting what, and is it equal to who's inheriting the other what, and oh, it's not equal. And you're talking about end of life care, and you're talking about death. Not easy subjects. And so when we Jenna and Mary were talking, we had to start from ground zero of how do you communicate, how do you listen, and tools to do those things. And then we had a meeting that Jenna, I think, facilitated our conversation. I said, no, we don't need mediators. Mediators when you come into a problem that you can't get over, or you're stuck on. Well, that's not true either. The mediation or counseling, or whatever word you want to use, is making sure that everybody is comfortable, willing to participate, willing to listen, and work together. And I can't tell you how, in the end, that was probably the most important thing of the entire class. And as we facilitate conversation, and now that we're not in this class, we continue to have monthly meetings to get that partnership. We don't have lease agreements and exit agreements. There's a whole lot that we haven't finished, but those tools of communication and what each of us expects in a meeting are absolutely keeping us going, because ultimately when Jeff and I die and the kids are in the role of management and ownership, as a parent, I want them to continue to talk to each other and work together as best as possible. And so that communication is huge, and relationship building and trust building comes with that communication. And so, and everybody kind of has to be at the table willing to participate. Anyway,
Yeah,
it was big.
To just sort of tail onto that, I think another part of it is that we're a family, and maybe many of you are families as well, transitioning. And I think that we get stuck in the role of parent and child a lot. And I think that the communication aspect, it was really helpful in bringing everyone to the table, not as a parent or child, but more as an equal, as a business partner, as a respected communicator and contributor to each conversation. And it was sort of a side benefit that I never would have seen coming. I didn't realize that I felt like a child to a parent, not necessarily an equal. And so having these guided conversations in which we had to respond in kind of a certain way, make sure we're listening, make sure we're really considering what everyone is saying rather than communicating as we always have. It was huge. And I think that it has carried over into creating our partnership meetings and having everyone at the table feeling more established and respected and considered versus our lifelong baggage of mom and pop and the kids. And so I think, yes, just being able to talk about these things is a huge part of it, but also it elevated, I feel like, all the participants in the partnership to the same table, working together to create our future.
Well, that's so great. Yeah, Allison, you mentioned it, you guys are a family, and families come in all different stripes, right? So we have worked with families who are blended families with kids and stepkids, and we've worked with families where some of the kids are off the farm and some of the kids are on the farm. And so these are not insurmountable issues, but they are issues that might have hold a lot of meaning for different family members. And so to bring all those things out and to create an estate plan or a plan for your farm that's going to work for everybody, that's transparent, that everybody's had a chance to weigh in on, is critical to the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of dovetails into who should be involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our family had it, I would say, relatively easy because everyone is local. Everybody is interested in being involved. My parents are interested in retiring. I know there's a lot of first generation or the older outgoing generation who think they want to retire, but don't actually know how to let go of that control. And both my parents are so ready to just be gone. So like we had it, pretty simple where we could look around and say, oh, all 5 of us should be there at every single meeting. We decided to not have spouses because they were not members of the partnership at that moment. But it was, I think that what was sort of relayed was the importance of making sure to have everybody who's involved at the table and contributing and understanding what's happening. And so that if something needs to be said, you're there and participating in it.
Right. Yeah. And just to go back to the estate plan for a minute. I mean, I think that was a really critical part of what happened in the regenerator is that came out of it is that you actually had an estate plan drawn up. And ultimately, right, it's the retiring generation's estate, right? It's what you get to choose what you want to do with it and how you want it to go. But having those conversations with your kids about why you're doing it the way you're doing it and what your thought process is and hearing what your kids' perspectives are can really set a better stage for relationships amongst your children going forward. If those conversations are had well, because sometimes, it might feel unfair. It might feel like, wait, why is it going this way and not that way? And so to have a chance to get that on the table can really help save and preserve relationships down the road once the retiring generation is no longer around.
Jenna, I want to say that because I had just finished an inheritance of my family home with my brother, with my mom's passing, just before this class came up, that was exactly why I felt it important, because my mom did not have those conversations with myself and my brother. My brother and I did not have those conversations with each other. And I felt like that was a huge disservice to her. Desires was that this family home be passed on to and kept in the family, but she had no plans of how that was going to happen. And I think that that's your typical scenario of the future of, the family's future of how you can have those conversations and everybody is at the table, knowing those conversations, can say how they feel about it, and everybody knows that is the success of the future of the property or the piece of land. And so that was what motivated me, absolutely, that I wanted my kids at the table to have these conversations before I died.
We have a really good question I think fits into this conversation from Rick, who asked if any of our spouses are included or involved in the process and or inheritance. And I believe early on we were having family meetings, not business meetings, and spouses would generally be there and participate. But as we moved towards a more formal conversation and created the partnership, we ended up keeping it to the 5 members of the partnership to make the decisions. Anyone who's married knows that they're involved, but aren't necessarily at that table usually. Mom, do you have any more to add to that?
No, I think that, the more you have at the table, the harder it is to get the work done. And so for us, it was the 5 of us was where we decided it was appropriate. And there are, in our living trust, one piece of the property does go to Zach, our son Zach, and his wife. So she is involved and she is totally aware of that situation. But making decisions, partnership decisions, Allie has now gotten married, and so she's got a partner. And so we just decided that just the 5 of us was, that the information is going to get to the spouse, but they're not at the table helping make the decisions.
Yeah.
So what we felt comfortable with.
All right, so I'm going to move on to step 4, which is how to start working on a plan. And you can't skip steps 1 through 3. So I just want to say that I think a lot of people get started and they're like, okay, let's make a plan. But it's really important to think through all the things before you kind of actually set up a plan. But just to get started, it's critical to set aside time to just talk about this, because, farms are really busy. Everybody has a million things to do all the time. And so if you just say, okay, we're going to talk about it at our regular meeting, you're not going to get to it because it's going to be at the bottom of the list. And, the other 9 things on the list are always going to take priority. So one really important thing to do is to say, okay, we're going to meet, once a month or once a week or twice quarterly, or set aside some time to only talk about, what you need to do and what questions you need to ask, and kind of going through steps 1 through 3. So setting up time for regular meetings, setting up appointments with professionals, and just really prioritizing it. And then if you run into a stumbling block, don't just stop. There are resources out there for you. You can call us, you can call FarmLink. So keep at it and ask for help when you need help, because inevitably you're going to have questions that you can't answer, or communication is going to become a challenge. So reach out if it feels like, okay, this is getting too tense, or we're at a point where we don't know how to move forward on our own. Some of the biggest challenges that we see are knowing what steps that you need to take, and what resources are out there. And then, incorporating intergenerational perspectives, because, people are at very, very different points in their lives and they have very, very different needs. And so understanding those perspectives and what those needs are and making space for them can be challenging for families. And then, fear of change, or an unwillingness to try and do things a different way, or attachment to doing things a certain way, can also become barriers. I think there's another one, and that, yes, communication. Communication is huge. And we have found that, families have habitual ways that they have learned how to communicate over decades, and it's really hard to change those patterns. And so it makes even simple decisions more difficult if you don't have healthy communication patterns, or if you can't kind of break out of some of those patterns that you've gotten into. So that's where we can help if you need us.
And we're going to go through some of those biggest challenges. And I just want to remind folks, we're going to give you, someone had asked, how can they connect? We are also going to list, there's a handbook you can download, and we're going to share the link from the International Farm Transition Network, and then the link to the regenerator. I think there's a waiting list, and then us. So we're going to make sure you have those. I'm going to chat those in just a couple of minutes for everybody.
Great. Yeah, the workbook can be really helpful to kind of give you worksheets to work through, just to keep you kind of moving forward. But yeah, Allie and Annie, what were some critical pieces of this for you?
Well, I think, Jenna, you did talk about those meetings, and being signed up for this regenerator class meant that we committed to an all-day meeting once a month. And that was way more than any of us could do. Not all of us went all the time, but one meeting we all went once. But then after we did that, we realized we did it. And so we said, we can continue having those regular meetings once a month. Maybe it's just 2 hours, and continue doing the work that we need to do, because we didn't finish it. But I think that it's really true. I mean, our farm really never even had meetings, not only partnership meetings, or and so having a meeting in itself is hard to set aside. And I know Jeff would say, let's have a family meeting, and everybody would think it was like, would run as fast as they could the other direction. So I said, they're not family meetings any longer, they're partnership meetings. And so in this process, you have to kind of stay awake to the changes that are happening, and the perspectives that are coming, personal or through the other. And it's really fascinating. And there's a lot of growth that happens that you have no idea is coming. But so those regular meetings, in my mind, if you don't set them up, you're not going to get to step one. You're not going to get to communication. You're not going to get anything, because the farm itself consumes you, as you know, and there's no time for it. Well, there isn't any time for it. And like Jeff said, we can do this ourselves, but there was no way for us to do it ourselves. And the professionals, fortunately during that class, they presented us to us. And so they knew the situation, they knew about small farms, and that was such a huge, and I hope that maybe FarmLink maybe has a list of professionals that people can draw from, so that they have a place to start. Anyway, Allie, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to sort of double down on the meeting space, and when you're not allowed to make major decisions on your own, it means that everyone has to be involved in major decisions. And so having those business meetings, those partnership meetings, were really important for Claire and I to start being really involved with all the stuff that my dad would make on his own without ever talking to anybody about, sitting in the chair at the table and being part of the conversation. It's huge. And so getting those set up, and the communication and everything that comes to that table is huge. It's a huge fundamental starting point for the transition.
And it's interesting that as we go along, as Jeff and I are used to making these decisions on our own, and continuing to do that, slipping up, so to say, and making the decision, and then realizing that we can't do that anymore. These decisions have to be passed through the 5 of us, and which slows down the process. But all of this is a transition of learning how to share that decision making, sharing the decision making, and the willingness to let go of the decision that's not how you want it to go. And, you know, it's all a process, and it is definitely a learning curve. It's, you know, and you keep seeing, you know, what Mary and Jenna are talking about. Oh, look at that. Yeah. I mean, you know, Allie's perspective of how it's supposed to go is different from mine, but we have to work it together.
Yeah. Well, we've only got 15 minutes left, and I know we want to have some questions. So, Mary, do you want to run through these pretty quickly and then we'll get to questions, or?
I'm going to let those sit there because maybe that'll stimulate a question. These are some of the big challenges. Of course, the list is not limited to our top 10, but I would say the most important that we get stuck in a habitual way of communicating, and that we want to untangle that. And the tension between the incoming and the outgoing generations about their vision and letting go and shifting is very palpable. And talking about it, I think, really moves that. But maybe this is going to inspire someone to have a question. So we've taken questions so far, but if someone has an additional question, and I see some people have to go to some other meetings, but, and we have the PDF now, has been posted a couple times in the chat. That's a really helpful workbook. It can walk you through, use what you want, toss out what you don't. But any questions from folks as we look at this list, or anything that you've experienced that you want to ask Annie or Allie?
And you can put it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it.
And we did have a couple more slides.
Yeah, we do have more slides, so we can just keep moving through them.
But
Yeah.
Post a question if it does arise, and then I'll just kind of cruise through these. Oh, someone did have a question.
Sorry. Yeah, Rashid here with CAF. I did see it. I'm going to put somebody on the hot seat. I did see a question way earlier from Ben at Lockwood Acres. I don't know what. Seemed like you wanted to preserve housing for my heirs, but keep the property in ag. Do you want to expand a little bit on that, Ben, for our presenters? Is Ben still here? And you do have to unmute if you do want to chime in here. Looks like Ben might have, yeah, I don't see him in here anymore, so he might have left. Sorry.
That's okay.
And that's still a relevant question as far as, well, that's why we ask, where do you want to live? Because if you're retiring and you have incoming folks, there's not necessarily housing for the next generation. So what's the cost of that? How do you accommodate that? I know the Mains have had to consider this too. How do you want to work on where one set of parents stay, or one person? And then how do you also accommodate a location for incoming, or are they going to live off the farm? So I think it's a balancing act that other families have encountered as well.
Yeah. And housing in California is so hard right now. I know that we just had a conversation in respect to our wages, knowing that, you know, I'm in a kind of a lucky situation in Woodland, so 30 minutes from the farm, and Claire is currently living at the farm and paying, you know, a little bit of rent. But the conversation was, if Claire had to move somewhere else, you know, our wage probably wouldn't actually be enough to cover that, you know, so it's definitely a hard thing to figure out.
And now we have another great question, which is about, and this is number 10 on our list, not necessarily 10 in order, because this does come up. How do we work with the on-farm and off-farm children, spouses? And this is a big question that's come up for some of our families. And I think, do you want to start with it, Jenna? Because you actually had that big meeting with one family where it really, the communication part became very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, what ends up often coming up is that fair and equal are not the same thing. And so if you have a child who is working on the farm and has made that their profession, and they're putting a lot, farming is not very well compensated. And so you end up putting, a lot of sweat equity in. And so how do you deal with that in an estate plan? And how do you make sure that that feels fair? And it's really all about, I can't see the question, but I'm hoping that I'm answering it. Mary, you can let me know if I'm not. How do you make a plan that acknowledges that somebody is making this their life, and also not honoring other children, but it doesn't necessarily have to be split, if there's 2 kids 2 ways, or 3 kids 3 ways. Are there creative ways to create an estate plan that meets needs? And what are the needs of the children? And talking about that and trying to find a way to meet it that maybe it isn't exactly equal, but maybe it feels okay and feels fair enough.
And I would add, and then Jenna encountered this, is you've got to talk about it. So we did have a family with some off-farm kids and on-farm kids. And what we realized as facilitators is that we didn't realize how little had been communicated to the kids. And it was a learning experience about how to make sure everyone is in the loop, because we had a formal family meeting with guidelines and some in person, some Zoom, and some of the information that was shared was a surprise. And so then we were fielding that, and it did turn out okay, because people just needed time to talk about it and understand these decisions. And we had a parent who did not want to talk about what the wishes were for that parent, which were different than the other parent. And so when it finally came out, it was wonderful. I mean, it was sticky, but then it was great because it was done and people could say they were sad or upset or move on from it. And if that had not happened, I can promise you there would have been a lawsuit after the death of this particular spouse. So I think it's not going to be fun, but you also want to honor the sweat equity, and it's okay to do it the way you want to do it. It's your farm and your land, and you do want to be able to talk about it in a way that's constructive and not antagonistic. And then hopefully that's responsive to that question. There's another big question about from Nate Brown. I don't know if you can see it, Jenna. And Nate, I'm going to come back to that, say this something similar. He says, not coming from the family, trying to take over the farm business and revamp the not currently productive urban farm that's been historic, a historic farm in the area. Again, it's about communication. How do the people who are with it feel about a transition, and how do you do that with respect and honor that tension of bringing in very needed new ideas and honoring the tradition and just the legacy. So it's a conversation. There's no answer in particular, but there is a process for talking about that. I mean, that would be my explanation. Jenna, would you add anything?
Yeah, I mean, just that there has to be some give and take, right? There have to be some things that get let go, and you have to make room for a new generation to come in with their own ideas. You can't expect to say, somebody to be like, okay, I'm just going to take you. Well, this might happen, but typically the younger generation has their own ideas about what they want to do with their life and what they're passionate about. And so there does need to be some letting go. And there also needs to be this honoring of what was built and what came before you and what is there for you, to have this amazing, business and legacy. So how do you honor that and also make space for new ideas?
And I think even that's where Allison's going to say something. I was going to say we've even hit this with the main family, because I think there'll be some new visioning, but there's also this desire to honor all the decades of work that came.
Yeah. I was going to share that back on the question from Alan King, just kind of a small piece of that puzzle is that in our partnership, we have different percentage of ownership. So Claire and I are majority owners, and then my brother Zach, who works with CAL FIRE and isn't as involved, is like a 10% owner. So we do voting and we do all that, and they're involved and they're a part of it and they're relied upon, but they have a little bit less weight. And that's one way that we've sort of dealt with that kind of division. And then for the next question, I was just going to say, you know, I feel like when I've seen a little bit of the retiring generation kind of not knowing how to move on and how to move forward with that dynamic, I guess, and maybe especially if it's not someone in your family, but just try to figure out, you know, that question of what do you want to be doing in 3, 5 to 10 years? I feel like for the retiring generation is really important, and sitting someone down and actually like asking them to lay it out can be really valuable in moving forward, you know, because farmers, I don't know about others, but I feel like every day is like, oh my gosh, can we just get through this day? Every season is like, oh my gosh, if we can just make it to May, that'll be great. And if I can just make it to September when it's not 1,000 degrees, that'll be great. And so thinking about 3 years or 5 years at the end of a career, I can imagine being really hard and maybe not well practiced. And so sitting down and trying to hammer out some like goals for moving forward towards the transition of the ownership or management of the farm could be helpful. Not less of a take from them and more of allowing them at their pace to move forward.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And asking the question, I mean, I think in my own, just personally in my own family, it didn't really become clear that the retiring generation in our family farm didn't want to actually retire. That was just sort of an assumption that I was making, that at some point there may be sort of a more official like retirement. But asking the question and then understanding, oh, like they actually don't really want to retire. That was sort of like, oh, wow, I didn't really understand that, because I just was making assumptions and didn't really explicitly ask. And so I think just having a good grasp on what it is people want and what they vision for themselves, and not assuming anything is really important.
And maybe let's just blow up the word retire and come up with whatever, because
Yeah.
farmers don't retire, right? It's just a different, what does it mean? What do you want to be doing? And how much of it do you want to be doing? How do you want to be connected to your community? Do you want to go out and do buying? Do you want to have a market that you always go to because you just love the people you see there? Like, that's really, I think we can ask the question differently and just throw the word out, because that's really a useless word in this scenario. But what do you want to be doing as your body can do less and you still want to be involved in this thing that's been so important for you? And just explore that question.
And folks, we have just a couple of minutes left. If anybody wants to get one more question in here before we close.
And great questions from folks, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for the questions.
I just want to say that I think the piece that the new farmer and the old farmers struggle with is that vision of the future. And I know that we've gone back and forth of Allie saying, you know, I want this farm to continue as it's been continuing. But I know that the only way that I have continued for almost 50 years in farming is because it's my passion of what I'm wanting to do. And so, which is not necessarily my children's passion. And so I need to allow them to have their passion, and they need to understand that it may not be the same as ours, and to you know, it's okay that they change the operation, you know, they make it their passion, and it may not be the same. And there's it's this definite, you know, letting go and allowing, and it's, you know, depends on how tightly you're involved in it or whatever, but that is a huge transition that will make it successful if on both sides we are able to, give and take and allow the other person to do as they wish. So thank you for listening.
All right. Well, I think we are out of time. So thank you everybody very much for being here. And I'll just let's see, I'm going to just skip through this. There's a few resources listed at the end here. So we have our website in case you need support around communication. And then also the program through University of Wisconsin. They have a really nice manual that you can use if you're not going to do something like the regenerator to help you kind of move through an actual program. And then finally, California Farm Link.
And we chatted, those have been chatted.
Okay,
So
great.
folks
Good.
have them, but they'll be in the PDF too.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody and take good care.